we get started, I'm going to ask folks to look around you. And if you're not seated next to someone, I'm going to ask you to stand up and go sit next to someone. So go ahead and do that now. This is going to be an interactive session. I'm going to ask you to discuss with the people around you and also with the group. So that's going to be hard to do if you're not sitting next to somebody. So just take a minute and do that real quick. Okay, and also I need a volunteer. What time does this end, Paul? 11 o'clock. I need a volunteer, somebody to tell me when it is. 10:55. Okay, thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. Okay. Good morning. I'm glad to be here. I'm Sam. Like Paul said, I'm a former public school teacher. Somehow I ended up in education policy, so the way I approach this work is often from the perspective of a practitioner, and you'll see some of that today. But before we get started, okay, it looks like we're all ready to go. I have some questions because I'd like to know who's in the room. Do we have any students in the? Do we have any students in the room? No. Okay. How about if any teachers? Do we have any teachers? All right. Excellent. Okay. And how many parents do we have in the room? Okay, great. How about grandparents? Do we have grandparents? Man, you guys are fortunate. How about self-described policy wonks? Do we have any policy wonks in the room? Okay. Advocates? And elected officials. Any elected officials? Okay. Bit of a different question now. How many of you have ever had a boss? Yeah. Okay. How many of you have ever been a boss? Okay, good. This is good. And how many of you want to be a boss? That's really interesting information. All right, thanks. Thanks so much for coming. I think what I'd like to do today is introduce a concept. It should be really familiar to you. And this is sort of an experiment for me, so I don't know if this is going to work or not, so we're going to try it. What I will try not to do, and I may fail at this, is to discuss my own view of education policy too much, because I think the real objective is just to introduce the framework for evaluating policy that hopefully you can take with you and use it in a way that makes sense for you. So the framework's pretty simple. It just uses a few questions, but before we get to those, I have another question, and I want you to turn to the person next to you, take 30 seconds, and discuss this question. Tell me, what is a boss? Ready? Talk to your person next to you. All right, when you're done, just look up at me. Okay, and does anybody want to share what do you think a boss is? You're going to have to talk loud. A team leader, okay, great. Go for it.
Visionary.
A visionary, great.
Encourager.
Say that again?
Encourager.
An encourager. Man, you guys are really positive. Say it again. A supporter, yeah.
Person in charge.
Yeah, absolutely, person in charge. Go ahead.
Say the person who's responsible for the flourishing and health of those under their care.
Responsible, excellent word, right here.
Somebody who stopped the stuff and rolled down.
There you go. Somebody who like buffers. Yeah. Go ahead. There you go. For the purpose of this exercise, I want you to think about a boss as somebody who hires or fires, okay? somebody who hires or fires, and it's true that they do a lot more than that. But for the purposes of this framework, that's who a boss is. And I love discussions, so you should feel free to not be so polite. It's okay to disagree with each other. We don't know each other, so maybe some of you know each other, but it's going to be okay, I promise. And I think we'll have a healthier discussion if we just say it how we see it. So if a boss is somebody who hires and fires, let's get to the framework. So the theory kind of works like this. Who can hire and fire when it comes to education? Well, a boss can hire a school, hire a class, a teacher, a book, a field trip, a test, or any number of things. So when identifying a boss, you can think about big decisions, like bundled decisions, like where you're going to school. You can also think about little decisions, like what course do you want to take, or what extracurricular activity do you want to take, right? And so I have a question for you, which is, who do you think can be a boss? So talk to the person next to you. When it comes to education, who can be a boss?
Maybe policy, the policy side, or classroom, or both.
Let's just keep it broad. Anything in education. I want to see what you're going to come up with. This is kind of the opposite of a direct instruction model. It's like, okay, so does anybody care to share? Who do you think can be a boss in education?
Parents.
Parents can be bosses? Okay. Who else? Teachers can be bosses? That's right. Coaches, superintendents? Absolutely. A board? Yes. A pastor? Absolutely. Absolutely, that's true. They establish the limits for which you're in. Union leaders, yes. As a former California public school teacher myself, who was also a union member, there were things that the union did that I didn't get to choose. So, yeah. Okay. That's what I was waiting for, yeah. Did you guys hear that? The students can be the boss. It's going to depend on what type of school you're in, probably the age that you're in. Yeah, go ahead. Students, well, Tim, would you care to say more about why you think a student can be a boss?
I was thinking special circumstances, either within two other classes, other students, the boss to other students who are younger than them, or within the same class if they have special expertise.
I think there are really three roles that I'm thinking about. So the first one we've talked a lot about, which is who's the boss. The next one is who the client is. And the third is who the service provider is. And that's really the framework. So who's the boss, who's the client, who's the service provider. Okay? So in most cases in education, I would bet that the client should probably be the student. So let's just assume that for a second. And really we have two remaining questions, which is who's the boss, who has hiring and firing capability, and who can be a service provider, who can actually deliver the education service, okay? So let's try this out. I'm gonna name a few situations and we'll see if you can come up with who the boss is and who the service provider is and who the client is. All right, so let's say there's a mom. She has a soon-to-be kindergartner, and she's looking for a school for her daughter. So just take a minute, talk to the person next to you, and answer the 3 questions. Who is the boss? Who is the client? And who is the service provider? So it's a mom. She has a soon-to-be kindergartner, and she's looking for a school for her daughter. Go. Okay, what do you think? Who's the go ahead.
Mom's the boss.
Mom's the boss is what I hear up here. Does anybody disagree?
Well, it could be the mother or it could be the state.
It could be the state.
Because if there's not an option, then really there should be no one.
I love these big name tags. Bob, I think you're right. I think in some cases it could be the mom, but if she doesn't have another option, it could be someone who makes a decision for her. She may not have the ability to hire and fire. Okay? Does anybody have anything else to add to that? Does anybody have a different answer about who could be the boss? Okay, who's the client? Both the student and the parent. Tell me more.
Well, the student is your direct client because that's to whom you would be providing service.
Right.
But your mom is the client too, especially in private arena because that's who's going to be choosing the provider.
Yes, yes. In fact, in ed tech, for a while there, people were crafting these great apps based on what kids wanted. But when they talked to parents, parents didn't understand what the kids were doing or didn't find it valuable. And so, because the parents were a gateway to the app, ed tech shifted towards creating apps that were meant with parents in mind as the client. So that's absolutely true. Okay, who's the service provider? The school?
Parent first.
Could be, yeah.
Always parent first, then parent decides over somebody else.
I see what you're saying, Leslie. So the parent could provide the service to the kid. They're the first educator of the student,
Parents do, they want.
but they could hire someone else to do that. Okay. Does anybody disagree about the service provider? Okay, so that's a pretty straightforward situation, right? And that's meant to sort of demonstrate the framework. Let's try another one. So a 17-year-old just got a great job and wants to drop out of high school. So who's the boss? Who's the client? Who's the service provider? This may not be a good example, but we're going to try it anyway. All right, talk to people next to you. A 17-year-old just got a great job and wants to drop out of high school.
Clarify, what's the legal age to drop out?
What is it in New Mexico? 16? Okay. Okay, what do you think? Let's hear some group think. Who's the boss?
17.
The new job. Tell me more. Because they're the ones hiring. Okay, cool.
I think you have a power struggle over the boss between the 17-year-old and the parent, probably.
There's
We
a
don't know for sure,
Power struggle between the parent and the employer?
Well, I would say the parent is hopefully encouraging them not to drop out.
Yeah.
So that's between the parent and the child.
Does anybody else have a different point of view? Who might be the boss in this situation? Yeah,
I would,
Peter.
yeah, I would say the 17-year-old student, he's now beyond the age where he has the right to drop out if he chooses. So, ultimately it's going to be his decision. So, and he also is the client because he's essentially firing the school that he's attending because he no longer sees that it's providing the value that's beyond what he's going to receive in his job. So.
Does anybody disagree with Peter?
I don't disagree, but I have a different view of who's the boss.
Go for it.
Depending on his financial situation, money may be the boss.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, Duell may agree with you. So I don't know if you guys heard that over there, but Peter was saying that the student is the boss, that the student is firing the school and hiring a different service provider, right? Instead of the school, it's the job he's going to. And what's your name?
Cheryl.
Cheryl said that money may be the boss, and Durrell just emphatically agreed with her. Okay. All right, great. Let's try a different one. So a student who doesn't feel safe at school and wants to attend a different one. All right. Who's the boss? Who's the client? Who's the service provider? They don't feel safe at school and they want to go someplace else. Okay, I hear some chatter. This one's left open on purpose because I'm hopeful that we'll get some interesting conversation. But who do you think is the boss in this situation? A student who doesn't feel safe and wants to attend a different school. The student is the boss. Tell me why.
Because they're going to hire or fire the school, but they're also the client.
They're also the client.
Right, because they're going to access the service.
So they could fire the service provider while still being in school, potentially? Or they could go to a different school, or, okay, all right. Cheryl.
I think the bully is the one is the boss.
The bully is the boss. Okay, say more.
Because they are forcing this child to feel unsafe in the school. They're the one hiring or firing the school for this child.
Interesting.
Okay, I call the state boss. If that child doesn't have an option to be able to get out of that situation, but it has to stay.
So Leslie, for those of you who didn't hear, Leslie says the state may be the boss if the child needs to get out of that situation, but they're forced to stay in the place that they're in. Right. Anybody else? Who do you think is the boss in this situation? Go ahead.
I think the parent's the boss. The parent who advocates for the child, look out for them, and stand up for them until now that find something else.
Okay, so I'm going to add on a question to this one. This is the last scenario we're going to do for a second. Who should be the boss in this situation? There's a difference between who is the boss sometimes and who should be the boss. Talk to the person next to you and discuss who do you think should be the boss. Okay, what do you think? Who should be the boss? Go for it. The parent should be the boss?
The
The administrator. Tell me why you think the administrator should be the boss.
Because that person is responsible for creating the environment for kids to feel safe. And that's obviously.
Which aligns earlier with your conception of what a boss is, to take responsibility. Okay? You agree with that? School or the school board. Okay, great. Okay, so each of these situations are saturated with education policy. A mom searching for kindergarten can include compulsory attendance law, which is, you know, what tells a mom when she must send her kid to school, like Leslie mentioned this morning. It's also open enrollment law. So how many public schools do you have to choose from? And perhaps it's transportation policy, right? How can kids actually get to school? To hire one school versus another. And the 17-year-old may relate also to compulsory attendance, right? We talked about this 17-year, can they legally drop out? Or more positively, what if the education policy allowed for more flexibility in earning credits? The student might be able to finish school and take the job, right? There's probably some policies out there that change the decision-making structure for that particular student. They can have both. Why either or? Or perhaps a career technical education played a role in preparing the student for the job in the first place. That's also education policy. When it comes to teachers and curriculum, who really decides what gets taught? Is that the way it should be? I mean, these are all policy questions, right? We could go a million different directions. Okay. So when students, like we said before, they don't feel safe at school, what are their options? I don't know if you looked at CNN.com right now, but the #1 article is about safety at schools. Parents sending their kids to school with bulletproof backpacks. Do they have other options? Can they actually hire and fire? Can they attend a different school? Some states allow students to attend different public schools when there are safety concerns. I think Texas has a policy like that, or academic concerns. But who sets the conditions? Who gets to make the decision? Okay, so let's try something different. I want you to just take 30 seconds. Don't talk to your neighbor this time. Just 30 seconds in silent. And I want you to think about a situation maybe similar to like I've described, right? I described 3 different situations. Think of a situation that we can try to use the framework with. After that 30 seconds, I'm going to ask you to share with your partner, but for right now, let's keep it quiet, okay? 30 seconds to think. Think of a situation that you want to talk about. "30 seconds can feel like a long time sometimes. So that was 30 seconds. What I'd like you to do is talk to the person next to you about a situation if you thought of one, and see if you can apply the framework. Who's the boss? Who's the client? Who's the service provider? Go. Okay, I hear it getting a little quieter. Would anybody like to share their situation with a larger group? Go for it.
Situation is there is an advanced capability student and a much less advanced capability student in the same classroom, and they're both vying for attention. They're both clients, but who's the boss in the situation for each one?
Now, don't tell us the answer yet, okay? We're gonna talk about it as a big group. So, tell me if I described the situation wrong. I just want to say it in the mic so people can hear me. Okay, there's a classroom. You have two students. One is highly skilled in whatever the class is. One is below skilled, low skilled. And because of their skill levels, they are both seeking attention. Did I get it right? Okay, so the question is, who's the boss? Who's the client? And the stipulation is the clients in this case are the students. Is that what you're saying?
I think both of them demand or have the right to be considered to be the client.
Okay, great. All right, so who's the boss and who's the service provider? Is there a teacher? Yes.
Part of the environment,
Yeah, there's a teacher. So we can just do this one as a group. Does anybody think who the boss? Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I have a discussion with the client.
Okay, who's the client?
Every other kid except those two kids.
Say more. Tell me more.
Because every other kid is going to experience the teacher trying to split the difference between the low skill and the high skill kid.
Okay, that's
Or choosing
interesting.
one.
Yeah. Any other points of view?
The service provider is the teacher.
Yeah, service provider's the teacher. Okay, who should be the boss?
The outside administration.
When I was a teacher, I remember doing a study on like how many referrals got sent to the office and like what time of day it was and things like that. And one thing I discovered is that referrals went up right around lunchtime, and especially when the temperature outside went up, when it got hotter. And teachers were definitely viewed differently depending on how many kids they sent to the office. And so, as an administrator, it can be tough sometimes in that particular instance. But yeah, okay, all right. Thanks for the thing. This has provoked some interesting discussion. Does anybody have another situation we want to talk about? Go for it, Paul.
So, as I mentioned earlier, we had our kids in public school up until COVID-19, two of the three of them. And then COVID broke out. They tried a half-baked online learning thing. And we kind of hobbled to the end of the school year and then homeschooled those kids for the next year. So that's the situation.
So Paul's talking about COVID. They were in a school. COVID hits. They go to online. It didn't seem totally adequate, and so you went to homeschool?
Yep.
Okay, who's the boss? Who's the client? Who's the service provider?
Boss changed.
Tell me more. I keep saying that to you.
Well, at the start, the boss is the school. So the school says, here's how we're going to do it, take it or else. And then at the end, the boss is Paul. Because he says, we're not going to take it, we're going to do it ourselves.
Paul fired the school. Yeah, I think that's accurate. Okay. All right, so we're going to change. Does anybody else have like a burning situation they want to share before we move on to the next thing? Okay.
So there is a private school that services special education students. They receive federal money through their LEA. And their LEA That's the problem.
Okay, well, I'm gonna say it, I'm gonna repeat it, and you tell me if I get it wrong, Bob. Okay, so there's a private school. They serve students with disabilities. And as part of this service, they receive funding through a school district, which is like an LEA. And the school district decides to change the rules about how the funding can be used. Is that right? Okay, so in this situation, who's the boss, who's the client, who's the service provider? The boss is the district. Tell me why. The district is telling the private school what they can and can't do. Okay? They have the money. Huh. Imagine that. Does anybody have a different point of view? Yes, Peter.
I think the school is the boss because if they decide that the change in rules is unacceptable, they can fire that service provider, but with the understanding the money, like, can they really fire them if they can't operate without the money? But still, they potentially could fire them.
So Peter has just, I don't know if you guys can hear that, but he had a different point of view where the school may be the boss because they can fire the school district, but as a result, they would lose money, right? And so Peter is hitting on something that I think is really important when it comes to determining who a boss is and who a service provider is. And that is trade-offs. Life is filled with trade-offs, right? So how much does it cost to change your direction? So that is really a constraint. And that's the next question I have for you. So thank you, Peter, for setting this up. What are some constraints on hiring and firing decisions that people have when it comes to education? And we can just talk as a group for the next 30 seconds. Does anybody have any ideas? Cheryl.
Some constraints are your legal responsibilities like degrees and, if you have to do PDOC,
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of things are constraints.
Absolutely. So Cheryl's pointing out that there are policy constraints on what you can and can't do, who you can and can't fire. So EEOC, right? But also like degree constraints. There are some homeschool laws, I don't know about New Mexico's, but there are some homeschool laws that require parents to have high school diploma before they can homeschool their kids, right? That's an example of that. What other kinds of constraints do you see?
Do you have somebody to replace the person you fired?
Ah, yeah,
Or do you have the ability to replace the person you fired?
right. That's a great question. Do you have the ability to replace the person that you're going to fire? You may not choose to fire someone if you don't have an alternative, or at least a feasible one. Go for it. Economic constraints. Money. Absolutely a constraint. I saw a hand over here.
I was gonna say, same thing, get them the money to hire staff.
Absolutely. Okay, so
Union seniority.
union seniority. Yeah, okay, so this is another policy decision, right? Because that relates to, when you talk about union and seniority, a lot of times this relates to teacher pay scales, which relates to overall budgets in districts. And there's an old saying in government, show me your state budget and I'll tell you what your priorities are, right? So, absolutely. Okay, so the framework has 3 basic questions, right? And there's steps to it. First, you describe the situation. Then you identify the roles. Who's the boss? Who's the client? Who's the provider? And then you reflect. Part of that reflection may be asking a different question, which is, who should be the boss? Maybe it's the right person. Maybe it's not. Who should be the service provider? Maybe it's the right service provider. Maybe it's not. But I'll admit that this framework is oversimplified a bit. But, and I understand that context is so important, but I hope the next time you read something about your local education budget or mark your calendar for the next school board election, that you pause and you ask yourself something like, I wonder who hired those budget numbers. I wonder who hired that date for an election. And then just a bit later, I hope you'll ask, who should be the boss? Identifying who makes decisions currently and comparing that with who should make decisions is one way to clarify your own position on education policy. It could make all the difference. So I know I'm early, but I'm done.
You have, 6 minutes left, so I won't have my alarm go off.
You're welcome. 6 minutes. All right, thanks for your time, guys.